This Janet Mefferd Today podcast is sponsored by Heaven's Harvest. Heaven's Harvest offers the finest in non-genetically modified heirloom vegetable seeds. They also offer emergency preparedness food and water filtration and storage products, all to help you prepare for the unexpected. History has shown it's wise to plan for your family's survival in uncertain times. And what's more basic to your survival than food and water? Learn more about Heaven's Harvest at heavensharvestseeds.com or call 800-516-4773.
This is Janet Mefferd Today.
Our confidence is in Christ alone.
Are we going to stand with God come what may?
If the Word of God says it, I believe it.
And that's the way it is.
And now, here is Janet Mefferd.
Great to have you with us again. As you know, there has been a lot of uproar in GOP circles recently over Donald Trump. Now, many, like over at National Review, have expressed astonishment at why Republicans and conservatives would ever back Trump, even as famous conservatives like Sarah Palin and Ann Coulter are publicly getting behind him. Now, in the midst of this, fellow frontrunner Senator Ted Cruz has stepped in to promote his mantle of consistent conservative and constitutional conservative. And of course, this is a way for him to set himself apart from Trump and other more liberal candidates. And from my vantage point, it's easy to point to a lot of Cruz's positions as being very conservative and constitutional. There is no doubt that there is much to like about Ted Cruz. But in this election cycle, I also think it's really important to take a good, hard look at him, too, just as I have on every candidate, because I think it's critical to go into every election with all the information you can get on all of these candidates. I think full discussion and analysis and honest journalism really provides us with the best way to be able to make an intelligent decision in the election. So with that in mind, I really appreciated what conservative author and blogger Diana West recently wrote about at her blog, dianawest.net. It is a two-parter. It's called Cruz v. Trump 1, Cruz v. Trump 2, the post-constitutional election. Diana, as you may know, is the author of American Betrayal and the Death of the Grown-Up. She was named one of Newsmax's 50 best conservative blogs for 2015, among other accolades, and she also happens to be one of my favorite writers. I just love reading her, and it is wonderful to welcome you here, Diana. Thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, Janet, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction and very inspiring, because I think you are exactly right. The more information we have, the better our decision will be for ourselves and for our country. So I really am glad we're going to be talking about this. And I should mention to your listeners, however, that I have actually endorsed Donald Trump. I did it in December at Breitbart.com.
Yes.
And, you know, that's just truth in advertising here, just so people know. I have made up my mind and have continued to examine the race and watch the coverage with that in mind. So without more ado, we can talk about some of the things I have been looking at in Senator Cruz's record, because he's someone I have greatly admired over the years. I was very enthusiastic about his arrival in Washington and a big supporter of many of the wonderful things that he has accomplished and stood for. Right. So I am definitely with you on that.
Yeah.
I did, however, begin to look a little more closely, given the branding around him as consistent conservative and constitutional conservative, which you mentioned, because what I find is that the branding is kind of creating an image of a paragon, not a politician. And I don't think it serves us well to examine one person or one party, warts and all, and try to get to the bottom of things while somehow creating a mythology around another candidate, which is where I feel conservatives are going with this branding. And so there are inconsistencies in his record, and what I discovered was they tend to form a pattern of political posturing going from the more globalistic point of view, which is very common in the Republican Party, the free trade, the pro-immigration policies that of George Bush and so on, toward the more nationalistic position, which is the new position really in the political public square brought about by Donald Trump's candidacy. In other words, immigration restriction, controls on the border, including a wall, a whole new focus on trade with American jobs in mind rather than free trade, these kinds of issues. And if you like, we can go through some of these actual positions that have changed, even as Senator Cruz continues to call himself consistent.
Yes, I do want to go through those because I think it's really important. And I really respect, Diana, that you've said right at the outset that you endorse Trump. So you're getting that out of the way and explaining to people where you're coming from. But you're also a very respected conservative. So it's not as if you're coming at all of this, as some kind of radical or something like that. You're just trying to be honest.
I work for no one. Yes, yeah. I work for literally no one at this point.
Well, I really respect your opinion. So let's talk about some of these things.
Sure.
For example, you've talked about how Ted Cruz springs from the internationalist camp as well. And It's kind of funny that you say that because I think for a lot of on-the-ground conservatives, they would say, no, he's not internationalist. He's for America. What do you mean when you use that phrase?
Yes. Well, of course he's for America, and I don't mean to suggest that he's not. But it's a way of looking at America among nations, a leader in global or internationalist organizations, whether it is, NATO or the United Nations. I mean, a lot of organizations that we've become very used to participating in. In olden days, there was a different way of looking at America as a nation state that became much less involved in world affairs. And of course, we've shifted over the years for many reasons, and our history has changed. However, what we've seen is an increasing erosion of sovereignty, an increasing erosion of the concept of citizenship, an increasing expansion of the world as a global sphere of trade or movement that is very much an erosion of the existence. It threatens the very existence of America as a nation state. And I think that we see this with the rampant immigration lawlessness that we have at our borders. I mean, this has not come under control. And when you see Senator Cruz, for example, when the Syrian refugee issue came up, he was initially for taking Syrian refugees. Now he's against it. When we saw a couple of years ago with the so-called Gang of Eight amnesty bill came up, Senator Cruz advocated a massive expansion of H-1B visas, which are the skilled labor visas, 500% from about 65,000 to 325,000. He was still advocating that. I just listened in an April 2015 interview. However, now, after Donald Trump entered the race and things have shifted, he actually advocates a moratorium on H-1B visas. That's a very dramatic shift.
Right.
We also see this in Obama trade, so-called Obama trade, the expansion of trade and movement in the Pacific sphere. That's the TPP bill, which was very hotly contested. Senator Cruz co-wrote an endorsement of Obama trade in May 2015 with Paul Ryan.
Yes. Now
he's against it. So if you look at this as a pattern, first of all, it belies the notion of consistency. And I don't have a problem with people changing their minds. This is not about rigidity.
Sure.
But it's about honesty. You see shifts, you see political changes that definitely seem to be influenced by the advent of Donald Trump and these more nationalistic positions that only he, I think, has brought into this race at all. I don't think we'd be talking about such things if he was not in the race. But you have to sort of take a look at that. What does that suggest about Senator Cruz? And I think what it does suggest is that his first reflexes fit in very securely with the establishment Republican internationalist bent, which is to open up the world, which is a denigration of the concept of nation state. It doesn't mean it's against American leadership in that context, but it is very much a global trend. It fits into the whole trend of globalism. And what you see him doing is tacking to the nationalist right, to the populist right, in order to compete successfully with Donald Trump. So I think these things are important for people to weigh. It isn't that they're against the law or that some kind of sin to change your mind or even your political stripe.
Right.
But I do tend to bristle when it's presented as pure, or when a candidate, as Senator Cruz, is presented as reliable, consistent, conservative down the line. And here you see very, very blatant examples of political shifts, which, again, there's nothing wrong per se, but they need to be acknowledged as such so that people can weigh them and see who really is, if your priorities are border, culture, language, things like that, who really does have that instinct that instinctive reflex to protect or restore such institutions. And for me, this was the basis of my own decision. I did not believe it was Senator Cruz based on this kind of shifting, and I did believe it was Donald Trump.
Very interesting. We're going to take a break here. Diana West joining us, talking about what is going on with our post-constitutional election. More thoughts on that when we come back on Janet Mefferd Today.
The Bible in the News is a presentation of Southwest Radio Church Ministries. Here now is Dr. Bob Glaze and Pastor Larry Spargimino.
2 Corinthians 5:17 says, "Therefore, if any man be in Christ, he is a new creature. Old things are passed away. Behold, all things become new." Carla Faye Tucker, the pickaxe killer, sat in a courtroom several years ago. The more she told her story, the more the jury was convinced she needed the death penalty.
The animalistic bloodbath this petite, curly-headed brunette was confessing was revolting. The photographs of two bloody bodies, a nude man hanging half off a mattress on the floor surrounded by his own blood, and a woman in a nightshirt with a pickaxe buried deep in her heart made everyone gasp.
On February 3, 1998, Carla Faye Tucker was executed by a lethal injection. She was the first woman in 135 years to be executed in the state of Texas, but because of her, death row in the Gatesville prison was informally renamed Life Row. After her conversion to Christ, Carla Faye Tucker won many women to Christ.
Some may complain that an evil woman like Carla Faye is in heaven is so unfair. But Jesus did say in John 5:24, "Verily, verily, I say unto you, he that heareth my word and believeth on him that sent me hath everlasting life, and shall not come into condemnation." Just before her scheduled execution, Carla Faye Tucker was interviewed for a broadcast that was heard all over America. She was asked if she were fighting to stay alive. She said she was not and deserved to be executed. She said those who follow Christ are not in any eternal way affected by an earthly death, and that it was only the case for Christ that she was now fighting for.
For more information, please contact Southwest Radio Church Ministries at 1-800-652-1144 or visit us online at swrc.com.
Well, if you have listened to me for any amount of time, you know I am about honest, fair journalism. I think that that is important. It's especially important at this time when we are making some very key decisions coming up on the presidential election in 2016. And I really fear for people who are looking at candidates through rose-colored glasses and are really not willing to look at some of the dark side, if you want to call it that, of some of their favorite candidates. I think we need to do thorough analysis on every single one of them. And we're trying to do that today, talking with Diana West about some great articles that she wrote on the issue of the post-constitutional election, especially going into, as a conservative, an analysis on the record of Senator Ted Cruz. Now, one of the things, Diana, that has been an issue, and I think needs to be an issue, is this issue of whether or not he is actually qualified to run as a natural-born citizen of the United States. Yeah. This is something, I think, that has become a big issue with conservatives, that if you even raise the question, you're against Ted Cruz, you don't want him, you don't like him. But I think if we're going to be constitutionally faithful, we have to be honest about this. What is your take on this issue of natural-born citizenry as it pertains to Ted Cruz?
Yes, well, as a matter of fact, back in 2013, in my syndicated column, I did go on the record believing that, or stating that, I believe that under this understanding, the originalist understanding of natural born, the criterion for presidential eligibility, I did not believe that either Senator Cruz or Barack Obama or Marco Rubio were actually eligible. So this is nothing new to me. It has nothing to do with anybody's presidential run, for sure. That said, I will say that watching Senator Cruz handle the question when it came up about a month or so ago was one of the things that drove me to take a harder, sharper look at him. I was actually shocked and discouraged by the way he treated this constitutional issue as a joke, as something to make fun of, something to distort If we go back to his performance at the debate when he addressed the issue, that was really what we were looking at, was making light of the matter. It's a constitutional matter, yes. And regardless of how it is argued or how we discuss it, it is nothing to dismiss, as Senator Cruz and many of his supporters have done, as you allude to. It's a very serious issue, and it's interesting to then delve a little deeper and say, well, what does that mean? If someone, again, being packaged not only as the consistent conservative, but the constitutional conservative, what does it mean when this is the attitude that we get, the reaction we get to this constitutional, very basic matter? And I think that invites more scrutiny. Yeah. What does it mean? Is he consistent sometimes? Yes. Is he inconsistent others? I think we have demonstrated yes. And on this case too, he may be an originalist, but is he always an originalist? Well, I don't think he is. Further looking at the issue, you see things like going back to the debate over the Iran nuclear deal we saw in the Senate. Yeah. I think one of the weirdest, craziest, most awful moments in Senate history was when the Senate voted 98-1 to strip themselves of their own constitutional treaty-making power.
Yes.
This was the Corker bill, and I don't know if we've ever really sat and taken stock of what that vote really meant. But that is exactly what it meant. And you had commentators, including people like Mark Levin and others, who noted at the time this was standing the Constitution on its head. Senator Cruz came out about a week before the vote with an op-ed in the Washington Times where he said it doesn't make sense to vote for this bill, and he criticized it. A week later, he voted with the 98 to essentially strip the Senate of its constitutional powers of approving a treaty by 67 votes. The one lone senator who voted on constitutional principle happened to be Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas. And he explained his vote in constitutional terms. Now, this isn't to suggest that those 98 did not have their reasons, did not think they were doing the best for the country, et cetera, et cetera. But if you're a constitutional conservative, one would think you would not flip-flop on that issue within a week and not stand up for that principle. It again makes you wonder, what is the consistency here on this issue? And then when I began thinking about the whole, really all of these things, one thing leads to another, and I realized the 3 years Senator Cruz has been in office, and that would also include Senator Rubio and Senator Paul as well, of course, the Constitution has undergone the most, there's never been a time when there was a greater assault on the Constitution coming out of the chief executive, coming out of the executive branch, the White House, Barack Obama. The depredations against the Constitution are legion. It doesn't stop. It's day in, day out. What was done? Whose job was it? Whose moral obligation was it to attempt to restore constitutional checks and balances? Well, It's the legislative branch. Right. It's the House. It's the Senate. What did Senator Cruz do that he can now point to as the constitutional conservative? Once again, we're going back to this branding. Well, nothing. I mean, we can sort of discuss the various statements that have been made, the op-eds that were written and so on, but we never got around to any kind of constitutionally mandated action. I mean, this is not something that's vague or, just optional. I mean, these are things when you swear the oath to support and defend the Constitution, that's your job. And the founders did leave our elected officials the very tools to fend off this kind of executive overreach, and they have not been used.
Right.
They have not been discussed. We have not been educated as a people by our elected officials. This is a big gap. And again, going back to this branding, these are some of the things I've been looking at, and then you start to see a different person emerge. And frankly, what I would say is not an evil person, not a bad person, a person, to be shunned or anything like that, but it's a matter of saying, this is a politician too.
Sure.
This is not a paragon. And the branding, what's it about? And who are they trying to kid? I mean, I think it does have various layers and permutations to consider here with what's actually being pushed on us. Yeah. But I think the first point is that we are dealing with people. We are dealing with deal makers, whether it's Donald Trump or any of the other candidates who have risen to this point in their political lives where they are national figures. I mean, that it's very difficult to get there as princes of pure principle, right?
Yes.
So let's look and examine and see who's really defending the best set of priorities for the individual voter, but not make it into this case of black and white and the angel on a hill versus everybody else in the mud. That's That's kind of my bottom line.
Yeah, no, and I agree with you on that. And it bugged me to no end when I would hear all of these people in Congress where we're all yelling on the ground, do something, do something, do something, do something. And they would do nothing. And the excuse was pragmatic. We can't remove him from office. You had mentioned Andy McCarthy's book, and I remember interviewing him on this book, Faithless Execution. And he said basically all the law is in place, all the reasons are in place to impeach him. But unless we have a political will, there's no point going forward because, as you know, as members of Congress have talked about, if you don't have the people behind you, you're going to put the country through this. And we know what they put us through during the Clinton impeachment. Well, I agree with you. Impeaching Bill Clinton, even if you didn't remove him, stained him forever.
Absolutely. It was a high point in my own personal living memory of Congress. That was the high point. And I'll tell you, if political will does not exist, who is paid every day by the American taxpayer to address that very issue? If you are in office, you have a megaphone and you have an obligation to do what is right. And if your job is sworn oath to protect the Constitution, it's to go back home to your town hall and say, hey, there may not be political will abroad in the land, but I'm going to do this because I got to protect the Constitution, and I hope you're with me, neighbor. Good. I mean, frankly, how else is leadership ever even displayed? We don't follow focus groups, or we shouldn't, on such incredibly important matters. And if everything is just a political will, well, why do we have people going to Congress? Why don't we just have, every day we can wake up and do a giant Frank Luntz focus group or something and decide what the bill of fare is in Washington? I mean, this is what leaders are for, especially when they aspire to presidential office. So I find that one of the biggest kind of cop-outs in modern history to say everything's in place. And you even had, the thing that was extraordinary, in December 2013, and I mentioned this in this piece at dianawest.net, you even had House hearings. They were extraordinary, where you had liberal academics making this case that there was something seriously wrong, never before, unprecedented wrong in terms of executive overreach. You even had Lawrence Tribe coming before Congress recently to discuss how the EPA policies, Obama's EPA policies, burning the Constitution. I mean, coming from a liberal like that's extreme. I mean, you've got a crisis every day, and these guys are going to work, and we're paying them, and they're not doing anything, and then they turn around, some of them, and say, hey, I'm a constitutional conservative. And you just say, where have you been, and how can you tell us this?
Right. Well,
and then you put it all together.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of people will say, well, we really appreciated when Senator Cruz stood up on Obamacare. He really made the effort with Obamacare. But one does have to wonder, was he reluctant to go forward? And I'm not saying he was, but was he reluctant to go forward because he wanted to run for president at some point and didn't want that on him? I don't know. We don't know.
We don't know.
We don't know.
It's in terms of the defunding mechanism has never been used to its potential by any means on any of these overreach instances. There's so many tools, even short of impeachment, that Congress has that they have not done. We have just been seeing one after another omnibus bill throwing these things, funding these things without any check. Yeah. And I think that it's wonderful. The rhetoric was great. I was very excited about it. I loved the Obama's government shutdown a couple of years ago. It was a high point again. You thought, wow, these guys are standing up for us. They're really doing their job. And it all kind of dissipated. And I would say it seems to coincide with decisions about presidential runs and how to move forward on, different kinds of priorities. But again, it sort of is, the bag is empty at a certain point. And it isn't so much, again, that this is separate from everyone else. This makes him worse than it. No, but you can't then take the mantle of Constitution defender and wear it credibly. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that even wonderful work as a lawyer on matters of great importance, whether it's religious freedom or gun rights or whatever the constitutional issue is, I don't think that even a good record there is enough when you hold it against 3 years in elected office, one of the most powerful offices in the country, one of 100 senators, and one with such visibility and such skills and such influence. Yeah. To just drop it all and run for president and then still claim the big record, and I don't see it. Yeah. Diana, wonderful points. We'll put up your article at janetmefferd.com. Diana West, check her out at dianawest.net. Diana, thank you so much. Oh, thank you, Janet. We'll be back.
This Janet Mefferd Today podcast is sponsored by Heaven's Harvest. Heaven's Harvest offers the finest in non-genetically modified heirloom vegetable seeds. They also offer emergency preparedness food and water filtration and storage products, all to help you prepare for the unexpected. History has shown it's wise to plan for your family's survival in uncertain times. And what's more basic to your survival than food and water? Learn more about Heaven's Harvest at heavensharvestseeds.com or call 800-516-4773. Welcome back to Janet Mefferd Today. So the Iowa caucuses are right around the corner, and this is a very interesting statistic here from CNN. This new poll they have out shows Donald Trump dominating the GOP field at 41%. They also report that Trump supporters are more likely than those backing other candidates to say they have definitely made up their mind. This is really shaking out to be a very interesting election season, and we're going to discuss some of this now with Nick Eicher, who's Chief Content Officer of World and co-host of World Radio. And Nick, great to welcome you back. How are you today?
Hey, I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Doing fine. Did you ever anticipate that this would be where the electorate is at this moment?
No, I think everything that we always thought we knew about politics, we now don't know.
Right.
This has really turned everything that we understand about conventional politics completely upside down, and we will be analyzing this until the cows come home. How did this happen? Is this because of kind of a cult of personality presidency, that now there's another possible cult of personality on the Republican side? I don't know. I mean, it's all speculation at this point. But those numbers are pretty startling, and I'm looking at Real Clear Politics polling averages for Iowa, and it's close in Iowa, but Trump continues to have a roughly 5-point polling average, and I guess what we will find out in just a matter of days is, can he turn those people out to the caucuses? It's a rather complicated process if you've never gone through a caucus before.
Absolutely. Well, a lot of people were remarking on the fact that here was Sarah Palin, who's known as, major conservative, coming out and endorsing Donald Trump. Some people are dismissing it as doesn't matter. She's old news. What did you make of that? How much of an impact do you think Sarah Palin's endorsement really does have?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, what was a little more surprising to me was not so much the Palin endorsement, but the Jerry Falwell Jr. endorsement.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah, sort of endorsement. I was going to say he can't endorse, right?
But he did. He did endorse on Tuesday. He formally endorsed Trump. So I mean, it was a bit of a telegraphed punch.
Wow.
That he was going to do it, when the way he introduced him and the way he talked about him when Trump came and spoke at Liberty University, but then to go ahead and formally do it. I think a lot of the Cruz people were thinking, or sort of expecting, that Trump would have a few more up his sleeve, and I think Jerry Falwell Jr. was one of those. I mean, to me, that's probably a bigger deal with evangelicals than Palin is with evangelicals.
Yes, probably so.
Because Falwell is a pretty well-known quantity, and Liberty University is a pretty respectable mainstream. It's the biggest Christian college in America,
right?
And for the president of that largest university in America to back him. I know it's not officially the school, but he's the president. He's the figurehead. He's the guy with the name.
That's for sure.
He's an important person. So I mean, I think the Palin thing came as something of a disappointment to the Cruz people and something of a surprise. But to me, the bigger deal is the Falwell.
That is interesting. Well, and this is what is really kind of different about this election season, I think, than past election seasons, where typically you would see conservative evangelicals all sort of trending toward the same candidate or two like-minded candidates. In this case, you have the top frontrunners here being Donald Trump and Ted Cruz. And there seem to be an awful lot of evangelicals who are going both ways. And odd to me because Trump certainly is not a conservative. He is morphed on a lot of different issues. But why do you think we are seeing some major evangelical figures going for Trump when, you're finding, I know in your evangelical insider surveys, that among the insiders, generally speaking, Marco Rubio has been the person that they support?
Right. I mean, I think there's a big dose of pragmatism to that group. I mean, these are people who are pretty heavily engaged in politics, and they're largely a conservative group, but I think there is pragmatism is probably a bad word to use because it can be a bit of an insult. But what I mean, I guess maybe instead of pragmatism is practicality. I mean, I think a lot of these folks who answered our survey make calculations about politics. You have to make choices based on the reality of the ground. You may, for example, think that Carly Fiorina is the most qualified person, but you're probably not going to come out and endorse her or say she is my choice because she is so low in the polls that it's unlikely that she'll win. So you want to look for the most conservative, viable candidate or the candidate who's most likely to support religious liberty and most likely to win in a general election. So there are all kinds of calculations that go into it. And I think that Trump is just an emotional feeling. He's a guy who people think he's so out there and he's so undeterred, unbowed by the liberal press that he's not going to cave in when the going gets tough. And I think that's probably what is motivating this, a sense of how on earth could things get worse? Here's a guy who can really deliver a shock, a body blow to the system, and the system needs a shock. I'm grasping for why this is.
Sure.
Why would people who would ordinarily be thought of as conservatives be supporting a guy who fairly recently talked about being pro-choice and who fairly, recently spoke glowingly of Hillary Clinton and her abilities?
Well, it is a conundrum, and I wonder if perhaps rank-and-file evangelicals' feelings toward illegal immigration and this refugee resettlement issue isn't the main issue that they are concerned about, because here was Trump who came right out of the gate on the issue of immigration, very plain-spoken, very firm, all the rest. Perhaps that was a good move politically for him to come out on that, because the evangelicals I talk to, that's a huge issue for them.
No, I think you may be right there. When you look at our survey and you see that Rubio is kind of the runaway candidate, it may very well be that the feeling among the Republican electorate is so reluctant to go with a guy who was involved as he was, Marco Rubio, as involved as he was in the immigration bill.
Right.
Just thinking, look, if he's willing to do that, then he'll cave at some other point. I mean, I'm just trying to I'm trying to figure it out, because when you listen to Rubio speak and the way he speaks, he's so well. He really understands religious liberty. He really understands a lot of the concerns that evangelicals have, and yet he's just not getting that much traction. And I don't know how to explain it other than what you've said, Janet, that maybe for evangelicals the immigration issue is a bigger deal than it is among evangelical insiders. But again, we're talking about polls,
right?
And there's only one poll that matters. And in Iowa, the one poll that matters is February 1st.
Right.
And in New Hampshire, the one poll that matters is that Tuesday vote. And in South Carolina, the one poll that matters. I mean, we will start to see, we'll be out of the realm of speculation, And we'll be looking at actual election returns here very, very shortly.
We absolutely will. And we know World Magazine's going to be covering all of it. And I just want to encourage you once again to get your 6 free issues of World Magazine. Just go to WNG.org/Janet Mefferd. And you'll also get, along with your 6 free trial issues, a copy of R.C. Sproul's book, How Should I Live in This World? It is a wonderful, wonderful opportunity for you to get caught up on the election and all the other issues that matter so much to us as Christians. WNG.org/Janet Mefferd. Go there now. Nick Eicher, thanks a lot, Nick. Always great to have you here.
Talk to you next time.
Okay. We'll be back on Janet Mefferd Today. This is Janet Mefferd, and I'd like to tell you more about Southwest Radio Ministries, one of our charter sponsors here at Janet Mefferd Today. Since 1933, Southwest Radio Ministries has been proudly proclaiming the gospel, serving as a watchman on the wall, ever vigilant in anticipation of Christ's imminent return. If you're looking to learn more about Bible prophecy, creationism, cults, paganism, or disturbing trends in the church, Southwest Radio Ministries offers some excellent resources on its website, swrc.com. You'll also find archives of their daily radio programs, Watchmen on the Wall and Bible in the News. I'd also encourage you to sign up for their free monthly newsletter. Each month, you'll be kept up to date on the latest that Southwest Radio Ministries has to offer in upcoming broadcasts, conferences, tours, and prophetic news updates. We appreciate Southwest Radio Ministries' partnership with Janet Mefferd Today and would like to encourage you to visit swrc.com. That's swrc.com or call 800-652-1144. Hi, this is Janet Mefferd to tell you about an exciting offer from World, my trusted source for news from a Christian perspective. Try World at no charge for 90 days and get a free copy of R.C. Sproul's book, How Should I Live in This World? I rely on World because I trust the reporting. I gain insight from the analysis, and World provides clarity to the news stories that really matter. I believe you'll also find World to be an invaluable resource to better understand critical topics with a depth that's simply not found in other media outlets. Armed with this coverage, World can help you to be a voice of wisdom in your family and your community. This trial includes bi-weekly issues of World Magazine, on-scene reporting from World Radio, and the fully shareable content of World Digital. Simply visit WNG.org/Janet Mefferd, that's MEFFERD, to get your World trial and Dr. Sproul's book all free. No obligation and with no credit card required. Visit WNG.org/Janet Mefferd. I think the whole subject of how evangelical leaders are coming down on the issue of the presidential election is one for the ages in a way. I've never seen such a disparity here. We have, as Nick was mentioning, this issue of endorsements. Actually, Jerry Falwell Jr., the president of Liberty University, as he mentioned, did come out not only introducing Trump when Trump spoke at Liberty and pretty much endorsing him, but also came out and endorsed him formally. Well, also another person along those lines, and I think Nick mentioned him as well, is Dr. Robert Jeffress from Pathway to Victory ministry here on the radio, and also heads up First Baptist Church of Dallas. And he has been introducing Trump in Iowa most recently, and he's been doing it elsewhere. And this was kind of an interesting thing. This is a contrast to what a lot of other evangelical leaders have been saying, and yet he and Falwell are pretty much on the same page here. I want to go back to September of 2015. Dr. Jeffress, who's a regular contributor at Fox News, was on with Sean Hannity, and at that time, now keep in mind this was months ago, at that time was discussing his thoughts on Donald Trump. Here's cut one.
You know, the fact is, if 2016 were any other year, Trump would be toast with evangelicals right now for some of the things he said, and other evangelical candidates would be topping the polls. But I think this year is different, Sean. I think there is a palpable feeling among evangelicals that this country has been in a downward death spiral since the time of Barack Obama, and 2016 may be the last time to reverse that trend. And while in a perfect world, evangelicals would like a candidate who is a committed Christian and a competent leader. I think if they have to make a choice this time around, they're going to leave religion out of it and go for the person they think is a competent leader like Trump.
Now, that is an interesting remark, because what is not said there is the answer about whether or not he sees the other candidates who are Christians in the race as being leaders who would not be competent, or at least not as competent. When you think about Senator Ted Cruz, or you think about Ben Carson, think about Mike Huckabee. So you have to fill in the blanks there, and you really can't unless you talk to the actual person. But here was Dr. Jeffress, who was introducing Trump in Iowa just a few days ago, and this is what he said. Cut 2.
It is a real honor to be with you this morning. Although as a pastor, I cannot officially endorse a candidate, I want you to know I would not be here this morning if I were not absolutely convinced that Donald Trump would make a great president of the United States. And most Americans know we are in a mess. And as they look at Donald Trump, they believe he is the one leader who can reverse the downward death spiral of this nation we love so dearly.
All right. There was Dr. Robert Jeffress. Now, I'm contrasting this with a very interesting piece that has just come out from Dr. Everett Piper. And he is the head of Oklahoma Wesleyan University. I actually had the privilege of meeting Dr. Piper in person several years ago at a gathering, a conference that I was at. And he's just a wonderful, smart guy, just really top notch. And I've talked to him before. I need to get him back on the show. But he wrote a piece about Trump himself. And this is very interesting to me because it is really standing in stark contrast to what we've seen from people like Jerry Falwell Jr. at Liberty and also Dr. Robert Jeffress. Well, here's what Dr. Piper had to say. He said on January 18th, Jerry Falwell Jr. welcomed Donald Trump to Liberty University to speak in the school's chapel. As the college president who wrote the "This is not a daycare" article that received so much national attention recently, I have been asked by the media if I would be next. Will I be inviting Mr. Trump to Oklahoma Wesleyan University to speak in our chapel service? My answer has been simple and brief. No, I will not. In selecting speakers for Oklahoma Wesleyan, party affiliation and political positions do not matter. Personal conduct, public statements, theological integrity, and moral consistency do. In short, unless it is an open debate where different sides of the issue will be presented, we choose speakers who generally promote our university's mission and who do not stand in opposition either in word or deed to what we claim to hold dear as a Christian community. I believe I owe it to our students, faculty, staff, board, donors, and church to do nothing else. And frankly, Donald Trump simply doesn't represent OKWU's behavioral, theological, moral, or political ideals. But we need to defeat Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders, many have said. Your criticism of Trump only helps them. You need to stop attacking those on our side. My response: anyone who is pro-abortion is not on my side. Anyone who calls women pigs, ugly, fat is not on my side. Anyone who mocks the handicapped is not on my side. Anyone who has argued the merits of a government takeover of banks, student loans, the auto industry, and healthcare is not on my side. Anyone who has been on the cover of Playboy and proud of it, who brags of his sexual history with multiple women, and who owns strip clubs in his casinos is not on my side. Anyone who believes the government can wrest control of the definition of marriage from the church is not on my side. Anyone who ignores the separation of powers and boasts of making the executive branch even more imperial is not on my side. He says, I'm a conservative. I believe in conserving the dignity of life. I believe in conserving respect for women. I believe in conserving the Constitution. I believe in conserving private property, religious liberty, and human freedom. I believe in morality more than I do in money. I hold to principles more than I yearn for power. I trust my Creator more than I do human character. I'd like to think that all this and more makes me an informed and thoughtful citizen and voter. I've read, I've listened, and I've studied, and there is nothing, absolutely nothing in this man's track record that makes Donald Trump on my side. I refuse to let my desire to win trump my moral compass. I will not sell my soul or my universities to a political process that values victory more than virtue. No, Donald Trump will not be speaking at Oklahoma Wesleyan University. Now, I expect this article is going to get more traction because it is a contrast to what Falwell said about Liberty University. Now, they've welcomed Bernie Sanders, for crying out loud, and I was critical of that for many of the same reasons that were raised here in this article by Dr. Piper. And that is, well, frankly, my position on inviting Bernie Sanders to Liberty is he's a commie. What are you doing? I think there's a certain degree at which you have to cut it off and say, you're too radical. And this is a Christian university, and we're not going to just open the gates wide to any Tom, Dick, or Harry who comes up with some harebrained scheme and wants to speak about all of this. We're going to be a little bit more discerning in that. So in that regard, I think that what Dr. Piper is saying is extremely important. How far do Christians take the issue of character? Senator Ben Sasse, for example, had confronted Donald Trump on Twitter about his adultery. Other people are starting to raise the issue of his moral character. But here's what's interesting. I went back and I looked into this because I was talking about this at home with my husband, and we were going back and forth. And one of the things I have long commented on is the fact that without the sexual revolution breaking down people's morals over many years, you never could have had an Obergefell decision. But people we know who had always been against homosexuality were, at the time of the Obergefell decision, saying things like, well, I can't really judge somebody else's sexuality. Look what I've done. So I was thinking about this on the marriage issue, and I said, I wonder how many people in America have been married twice or even 3 times or more than that. And I was looking up a Washington Post article. The most recent numbers I could find were actually from 2013, but, these are kind of delayed as they come out. 9 million people in America have been married 3 times or more. So what does that do to the electorate? What does that do to the electorate? When you have that many people who have had so many marriages, for whatever reason, they're not going to look upon Donald Trump as being somebody to morally condemn. They're going to look upon Donald Trump and excuse that portion of his character because they'll say, I'm no different. Why should I judge somebody else? And this is the problem. When you have defining deviancy down, as they said, this is what happens. So what I see happening in the culture is increasingly it is the Christians, and maybe more and more and more, pretty much only the Christians, who are looking at the issue of moral character and making a big deal about it. And I'm not saying it's not a good thing to make a big deal about it. It is important. The contrast on the other side, however, is given where we are as a nation, given where we are via Romans 1, are we really under the judgment of God? Are we really doomed as a country? Is that downward death spiral Dr. Jeffers talked about an inevitability? How far do we go in excusing behavior, excusing moral character, excusing positions simply because we may feel this person's the only chance we have to save the country? Listen, we can never take our eye off the ball, folks. The Lord God remains on his throne. He is sovereign. He requires us to be faithful as Christians to his word. And we have always talked about this regarding evangelism, that our job is to be faithful. God's job is to be successful. He does the saving. He calls us to do the proclaiming of the gospel and the work of the Great Commission. And we trust him with the results. So I think there's going to be a lot of need for gut checking. Are we going to be pragmatic? Are we going to be faithful? And where do we fall on that spectrum? I'll leave you to think about that. We'll be back next time, but we thank you for tuning in today at Janet Mefferd Today. We'll see you over at janetmefferd.com.